Hey, this is one of your co-hosts, Brendan, and I'm here with Kyle Morton. We are doing a sound gaming podcast. Hey, Kyle, start the show.
Yep. Yep, that's the plan.
Okay, so it's been a little while since we've been here.
Just a bit. Just a bit.
You wanna shoot for the stars and tell us what's been going on?
Yeah, so I got married, by the way. I mean, I know this is probably old news to a lot of our common followers, but for those out there who are not like directly in CGA or good friends or close friends or whatever, I did get married on Valentine's Day. Excuse me.
Nerd.
Well, hey, what can I say? We're so in love. So that was the vast majority of why the entirety of February was virtually non-existent for us. And then more recently, we had a kind of a moving situation that ended up not being a situation, but in the heat of things, we just were so preoccupied. So apologies for the dry spell. I'm not happy that it had to happen this way, but we are now back with a revised schedule that better suits the long term, I believe.
And you know, just so that you're not taking all the heat for us being out, I was injured for 6 weeks as well.
Okay,
was making life a little bit difficult for us, like even thinking about getting together. What is the revised schedule?
As of now, starting on what's Sunday, April 1st.
Yes.
Okay, so April 1st will be, because it's not April Fool's Day today, you have to take me seriously. April 1st will be...
Hold on. April 1st will be? That's a joke for later. They'll get it. Yeah.
So keep that in mind. Yeah, anyway.
Sorry, didn't mean to derail.
No, it's fine. We're all about derailing. That's part of a conversation.
That's actually literally the conversation today.
April 1st is Monday. Oh, so 31st is Sunday.
Okay, very good.
Bummer. Anyway, 31st, April 31st. Just kidding. March 31st. Wait, is there 31 days in March? January? Yes, there is. So April 3rd. I can talk. March 31st.
You know we're trying to talk for a living, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, some of us. I do actually talk for a living on the phone. Anyway, but sometimes I do this there too. But that's okay.
Okay.
March 31st. Starting March 31st, we'll revive our schedule, and we will be switching, because, you know, that's the whole point of this whole derailment, is the schedule. Switching to a bi-weekly, so every other Sunday we will be launching, and this will ultimately provide more time for real life, more time for scheduling, and more time for recording and editing.
Absolutely. I'm excited. I think it's going to give us more time to kind of flesh things out and develop. So I think that maybe this is a good time to segue into what we're talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was an interesting discussion on our Facebook page recently, or group, I guess it was. Yeah, it was the group, about the general concepts of how you can feel like you're breaking game mechanics, or like breaking the game as it would be understood by either a player or your DM. Within the realms of Dungeons and Dragons. And why don't you give your kind of insight on how that feels to you?
Okay. So as always with the Sound Gaming Podcast, I'm taking the perspective of a DM. Kyle is taking the perspective of a player. For a DM, the game feels broken when your players have done something to break the plot. Sometimes they'll rush after an enemy that's too strong that you're trying to tease for later. Sometimes they will change something about the politics of the country that you've painstakingly taken time to do. Like a king makes you upset, so you find a way to assassinate that king. Oh my God! There goes my story for the next 6 months because he was supposed to be your quest giver. Right? Things like that.
Oh God!
Are what I what I can relate to DMs for, as far as feeling like the game has been broken. I don't feel that way anymore. I've changed my stance on what game breaking really is. Now I feel like a good DM should be able to improvise through anything and give the story to the players. And that is a place of humility that you kind of have to come to as a DM and as a storyteller. Like, this game belongs to everybody. But that being said, there are definitely moments where I still feel like, how am I gonna deal with this? What did you just do? For example, in my last game, I have a player named Rob, and Rob used an item that I don't want to say I shouldn't have given it to him, because it's been entertaining every time he has. But it's essentially it's like a handheld version of the mirror of life trapping, so he can put people into this mirror. He shown it at a Elder Cthulhu type beast, and is like, okay, well, there's nothing that says this doesn't work, so I guess it works. And so he filled one of the rooms in the mirror with this thing. And that's gotten my storytelling into trouble a couple of times, but it's always been worth it.
That is kind of an interesting one. Yeah. Like, hey, I've got Cthulhu in the mirror. What does that do for me?
Yeah, like God. The game mechanic for him is that he's a creature in Pandemonium that is the thing that ties all teleportation spells. Like, it actually connects the two endpoints through Pandemonium, and that's how people get from one place to another when they're teleporting. And that's just my own flavor for that, but he took that thing and put it in a mirror.
And now you've got a...
Yeah, and I'm like, I wonder how that's going to work from now on.
Not quite the iPad I was envisioning.
Yeah. How about from your perspective?
I just think that there's... So, like, I'm as always, I'm a relatively new player in comparison to some of the other folks that I typically play with. And so oftentimes I just don't really understand the mechanics well enough to understand how one might consider them broken, or how one might consider a situation broken. I'm at the point where anytime I'm in a game, I'm fully at the mercy of the story and of the DM's decisions. I might get a little like, oh, I actually do know that rule, and I'm not quite sure that's how it works, but I'm sure the DM has some goal in mind. So I'll just roll with it.
So maybe let's broaden it up a little bit. How about instead of using the term game breaking, let's just call it unfair.
Unfair. Okay. God, that changes things. Unfair could be anything from like how my dice treat me. Like,
sure. Not acts of random chance, though.
Like, sure, okay, so
like other players or the way the DM is acting.
Well, I mean, when you're rolling only 7s, that doesn't feel like chance.
True. You might need to go leave your dice out in the moonlight of a full moon.
Perhaps, but to touch on things that actually could be referred to, like other players being able to maybe know the rules a bit better so they can perform actions in a way that seems more efficient. Sometimes I feel that it's not fair if, say, a DM won't properly allow me as a player to tap into the knowledge that my character most definitely have that I just don't have.
Yeah, that's
because, like, my character, he's been a freaking warrior for decades.
Right.
I haven't been.
Right.
So if I say, I'm going to go in for the coup de grace.
Yeah.
And my DM's like, what do you want to do? It's like, I don't know. The dude wants to make the kill. I don't. How would a person of my character's stature and knowledge know? Like, you're going to make me roll investigation or maybe insight or history? Yeah. But, like, I want to make the most effective kill possible that my character knows how. And perhaps if then the DM's like, oh, okay, yeah, so it comes to mind that blah would be the most effective. It's like, okay, great. Then maybe then I'll RP that a little bit. Yeah. Kind of roleplay that concept. But if he comes back as like, I don't know, how do you think you... Dude, I don't know. He makes the kill. That's when my RP just kind of stops. And I'm like, okay, well, it's no longer fun for me because I would really like to make the most effective decision, but also in a way my character realistically would. But that's not always a knowledge that the player may have.
Sure.
So just things like that, I think, would be the most frustrating for me when
So really, like, you're looking for a situation where you and the other players can maybe help riff for a better situation.
Sure, like just it's there's so many more situations like that.
Yeah, sure.
Like a wizard going into a specific situation might know exactly what this thing you just described on the wall is.
Yeah.
But the player playing the wizard may have no idea that they could potentially know that already based on the character's knowledge.
Yeah, the DM being a little like ham-handed, I think, is a bonus for players. Just saying, hey, there's this thing. Oh, you might recognize this because you went to this particular school, and you spent some time under this teacher, and he knows a little Celestial, so maybe you know a couple of words. Like that's definitely a reasonable way to play, I think.
Yeah. Like it's one of those concepts that like it's hard because let's relate it momentarily to a video game.
Okay.
At any stage in a video game, all of the relevant information is straight up handed to you on a platter.
Right.
Because it's painted to the screen, or a little pop-up shows up that shows you can interact with it, or there's an entire interface, or it's very obvious that you can do something with it. But when you translate that into a role-playing aspect, that whole concept exponentially increases in options, quite literally infinitely increases in options, but without you knowing that they exist or knowing potential paths that you could take. And so I think that's one of the biggest issues I have, is when a player knows that they might not be able to make the most informed decision and then seeks out assistance and doesn't get any. So if me as a player and I'm just like letting things happen around me, that's my fault. Yeah. I'm sorry that if you're upset that you just got dragged 600 miles away from what you believe should have been the plot point, I did this already. Yeah. I'm learning from that, and I'm trying not to let that repeat. So I'm being very vocal as a player now to try and manipulate outcomes as best as possible. Yeah. But I don't always know how to. So that's the part that I typically need help with, and if I can't get that help, that's where I start feeling like things aren't fair. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. That's a good reply. What's the next thing?
So right now, one thing I wanted to make sure that we're kind of blanketly aware of is like I know a lot of people this is kind of a brief referral back to the whole concept of game breaking. Yeah. A lot of people would make an assumption that, oh, you can't break the game. The rules as written are 100% solid. You have to follow them and just follow what they say. Like, read the effing card kind of thing. However, I'm not entirely sure that's exactly what we're going for. We're not quite looking for like actually breaking rules as written, but at least in my mind, I'm kind of exploring aspects that might allow you to use rules as written to produce outcomes that might be breaking the story or misaligning with the intentions of the plot, or concepts like that. Does that kind of align with how you're kind of hoping to get that point across?
Yeah. So like when I'm coming at it from the other side of this coin, I'm looking more like when you have those moments happen, like where like it's a bit about reading your players' like faces and like kind of giving them a chance to maybe say that was unfair, or that was not the way that I wanted it to go. If we're like just defining what great game breaking moments are, game breaking moments are when there's just this kind of air of disappointment in the room. Yeah. I had one in my last game. I already described it, but like I literally had to tell my players, okay, I need a couple of minutes to think about what the repercussions are here, so that I can like improvise a storyline and maybe help us kind of get back on track. What my intention for the box that you opened what was supposed to happen here clearly didn't, and I don't know how to handle it, but I need that moment. In the same way that players sometimes need a moment to kind of think about things or get clues from their group. Sometimes DMs need to get clues from their group.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, even from my one time DMing a one shot, like I cannot tell you how many times I had to just take in some cues from the audience or from my players as to how they're reacting to any given situation. It was definitely an interesting concept, even just for that brief period. And I can't imagine running a campaign where all of a sudden you've got 3 more campaigns relying on this plot point that you just knew was going to happen. But then all of a sudden they're like, oh no, that's just not going to happen. And it's all perfectly valid in the story and the mode of how they came to that ultimate result.
Yeah.
But like, okay, well, now what? Like, so I can see how that could definitely feel game breaking from a DM's perspective.
Right.
That makes sense.
Okay, so that's kind of our disclaimer.
Right.
That's kind of our where we're taking it. We're not looking at the thing that we're not looking at is intentionally breaking rules as written.
Right.
We're looking at the effects of rules as written on the game.
Correct. And how players might use rules as written to modify the desired outcome.
Yeah.
Okay. So now that that's set, please don't send your hate mail about rules as written, can't be broken, got it, cool, great. Also, just to be fair, we are including rules as written in a homebrew scenario. So like if you have a legitimate homebrew scenario where you've modified rules and have them written out and cool, great. Those are your rules as written and not necessarily just rules as written by wizards, but just in general, rules as written in this setting that you're in. So
DMs, if you have them, stick to them.
Right, exactly. You're the DM. Don't let... Obviously, they're written for a reason to be followed. So, that said, where are we going to find the most likely place to like maybe a player will understand or feel it's broken? Like, because that's kind of like... I get some concepts, like maybe a really epic 9th level spell did next to nothing.
Yeah.
And like, okay, well, what?
Yeah.
And so that could feel really disappointing from a player's perspective.
Yeah.
But like, I have a hard time conceptualizing where else it might feel this way.
Okay. I mean, like the specific examples of like the wish spell or
okay,
is that kind of what you're
like I think specific examples, or I mean, I don't know, like if generally speaking, just I think the examples we have set up are probably really good places to kind of point and touch to.
Okay.
But like also looking on the sides of like generics, like where else could you be in a position as a player and just feel totally disappointed about the outcome and be like, oh, well, dang. And it could totally feel like the game, as you thought of it in your mind at the time, was just like broken. Like, okay, well, that didn't happen at all how I wanted it to.
I'm a talker.
Sure.
Like, I tend to play characters as ones who are the kind who speak, and that's how they kind of get through situations. Finding an NPC who is unshakable or has no depth, or you can't really talk your way into a different situation with them because the DM didn't think of it or isn't improvising on the fly, or like this isn't the salient plot point that they wanted to have. Like that feels pretty unfair. It's like I have this toolkit and I'd like to use my tools, and and whenever I'm doing it, I'm heavy RPing.
Yeah, and I see that also, like, that's a huge one for me. Like, I would so much rather resolve a conflict if I can, by like really creative use out of combat.
Yeah.
like, cool, yes, you can use this move and align the people just so and do the one move that now is all of a sudden better because of your last 2 turns of actions. Great. That's like combat creativity, but my favorite is the role-playing side.
Yeah.
Like, but I can also totally see where a DM might not be ready to allow that kind of interaction.
So I had a one shot a while ago where I was a player, and there was a situation. Okay, so I should set this up. I was playing my character, and like the improvisation for him, like the background for him, all came out of a weird character from Euro Trip. Have you ever seen that movie?
Once?
Okay, so there's like a really weird, like pushy Italian guy on the train who
Muscusi. Yes,
that was
do.
me.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's like one of the only non-primary characters I remember from that movie.
Yeah. So there was somebody like behind a locked door in an inn, and we knocked on the door, we banged on the door, we finally got them to open the door, and I just wasn't having anything to do with not getting into that room and talking to them for as long as I could. So just very, very, like, I was so pushy. Like, I was definitely kind of, like, I put my foot in the door, like, I persuade. Excuse me, no, 1 minute, please, no, just hear me out for 1 quick minute. No, I just would like to know a couple of simple questions. Just.
Oh, God, okay. Yeah.
And so, like, I know the DM wasn't set up for that.
No, not at all.
I knew what I was doing as a player was probably a little bit of a dick move, but it was so much fun in the moment that I just went ham and went all in.
Yeah.
I also should say that I had gloves of thieving on, invisible gloves that give you like a plus 11 or something to sleight of hand.
Oh gosh.
So I was just in there being pushy and pickpocketing everything at the same time. So I mean, I guess that also should teach DMs not to put all their eggs in one basket. Like, there shouldn't be one room that has all of the answers to begin with.
Right, like,
or just improvise that. Oh, that thing wasn't actually on this NPC. I'll keep that in my pocket and put it in somebody else's hands later on.
Yeah, no kidding. Or like just make a locked room and someone inside, then you go in and you actually saw a mannequin. Sorry.
Yeah. Improvising on the fly is a big deal.
God, I don't know how I would take, like, if I were DMing that. Oh goodness. I might have said he slams the door and breaks your foot. Like, at that point.
I actually passed the save to keep my foot there. So there was some chance to it.
Yeah.
But I also had other players standing behind me, ready to like kind of jump in and kind of help barge our way in.
Oh god! It's like, if he gets his foot in, I'm gonna push really hard. Oh god! Okay, that's fun. So, gosh, all right, that's interesting. All right, moving to like the DM's view. As your perspective, what do you find the most frustrating as a game-breaking moment in your opinion?
Game-breaking moments for me usually come out of something where the player does something that seems simple and they don't realize how complex the mechanics are that they're kind of poking around at. Like, well, what if I just do this? Just do this little tweak. Do just this little thing. And maybe I've strung out like 7 events down the row that I would like to see keep going, and then having to kind of improvise on the fly.
What if I feed this magic sword to this multicolored beast?
Sure.
Oh god.
Yeah.
I feel like you weren't quite ready for that.
So, like one of my campaigns, I had this whole thing set up, right? The moon. A second moon appears in the sky for 1 year out of every 10, and it blocks out the sun. There's going to be a whole year of nighttime. Like, I had all this stuff planned for what happens during that year. One of my players wishes for the sun to come back. Well, okay, so that means that the sky temple that is the moon that we just set up because they didn't know it was a sky temple yet. Well, that thing's going to come crashing to the ground. It's going to nuke the country to the west of you or whatever. The king who had gone, also goes away for that year, he was recharging in that solar temple. Like, all this stuff, all these things, I'm like, oh, these are gonna be events that you're gonna find out as you go on, and like all right, well, that's not gonna happen. We're just gonna accelerate the timeline. And now there's gonna be a war. Just kind of.
So, can you read me the rules as written on Wish? Because I feel like there's a way. Like, man, I feel like you should have some degree of flexibility as a DM.
You do. And usually what my degree of flexibility is to be trolly back to them. If they don't word their wish exactly right, they'll get it to them in a way that...
So you're a genie in a bottle then.
I'm a jerk in a bottle. Wish is the mightiest spell a mortal creature can cast. By simply speaking aloud, you can alter the very foundations of reality in accord with your desires. The basic use of the spell is to duplicate any other spell of 8th level or lower. You don't need to meet any requirements in that spell, including costly components. The spell simply takes effect. Alternately, you can create one of the following effects to your choice. You can create an object of value up to 25,000 GP in value that isn't a magic item. The object can be no more than 300 feet in any dimension, and it appears in an unoccupied space you can see on the ground. Or you can allow up to 20 creatures that you can see to regain all hit points, and you and all effects on them described in the Greater Restoration spell. You can grant up to 10 creatures that you can see resistance to damage of the type that you choose. You grant up to 10 creatures you can see immunity to a single spell or other magical effect for up to 8 hours. So, like, when you go through it, there is actually a lot of restrictions. You can undo a single recent event by forcing a reroll of any roll made within the last round, including your last turn. Reality reshapes itself to accommodate the new results. For example, a wish spell could undo an opponent's successful save or a foe's critical hit or a friend's failed save. You can force the reroll to be made with advantage or disadvantage, and you can choose whether to use the reroll or the original roll.
So basically, that specific line just makes me feel like a rules as written retcon.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of intense.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess what part allows you to just dictate what you want to happen?
This next part.
Okay.
You might be able to achieve something beyond the scope of the above example. State your wish to the DM as precisely as possible. The DM has great latitude in ruling what occurs in such an instance. The greater the wish, the greater the likelihood that something goes wrong. The spell might simply fail. The effect you desire might only be partly achieved, and I would never let a wish fail.
Yeah, no, like, that's such a cop-out.
Yeah, it really is.
I wouldn't either. Like, not gonna lie.
The effect you desire might only be partially achieved, or you might suffer some unforeseen consequence as a result of how you worded the wish. I love that line.
Yeah, no kidding.
For example, wishing that a villain were dead might propel you forward into a time period where that villain is no longer alive, effectively removing you from the game. Simply wishing for a legendary magic item or artifact might instantly transport you to the presence of the current item's owner. The stress of casting this spell to produce any effect other than duplicating other spell weakens you. After enduring that stress, each time you cast a spell until you finish a long rest, you take 1d10 necrotic damage per level of that spell.
My God.
Yeah. This damage can't be reduced or prevented in any way. In addition, your strength drops to 3. If it isn't 3 or lower already, for 2d4 days. For each of those days, you spend resting and doing nothing more than light activity. So there is a lot to this spell. Most people just use that one chunk where it's like you can wish for a big thing and the DM will kind of decide where it gets you.
That's interesting. I like that you can use it as basically a free of any other spell, whether or not it's in your spell capability.
Yeah,
and it literally just says, it just happens.
Yeah. You
It's
don't
like,
need the
you don't-
components.
yeah.
You don't need a arcane focus.
That would be an interesting. How could you use wish? Oh goodness, I don't know if we should save that for a different podcast, because like I feel like the wish spell could be such an elaborate concept just in general. But oh god, that's interesting. Yeah, I think I'm gonna hold off on that for now, just because it could definitely derail for a while. But I can see why wish would make it very difficult for a DM to be able to not break their game, at least in their storyline, while satisfying. Like, how do you either break your game or you break their game? It's like in the whole description that we've set up, like game breaking in the sense that, oh well, that was a disappointment.
Yeah.
So now you're disappointed as a DM because you don't get to tell the story.
Yeah.
And or they're disappointed because, well, the sun is never gonna be back in the time, and what did I just waste a 9th level spell for?
Yeah.
Like, okay, yeah, that's certainly a hard choice to make as a TM.
It really is.
Like, I can see you trying to be like, oh, okay, let me brew on this for a moment. Go get drinks.
Yeah, pretty much. All right, I guess it's dinner time.
Right? Is food ready? I need a minute. God, that's intense. That is quite intense. Can you think of any other specific moments as a DM you've personally had that have just like had to make you like completely pull a lateral?
The other thing that happens is dropping hints that people don't take.
God.
Yeah, just throwing out plot hooks and not watching them get bit on. I think some of that is a little bit like the DM's ability to storytell. Like if you haven't worked enough with a character, if you haven't worked enough with your player, on like kind of getting them to have the awareness that you're going to be playing in their backstory, it can be kind of hard to get them to bite on stuff. I was talking to Sam recently, and he was talking about a player who had this backstory about like he's a Minotaur, and there's like his family has stuff going on. Sam brought in these Minotaur skeletons, and they didn't investigate the Minotaur skeletons; they just defeated them. So he couldn't link in their backstory to. Yeah.
Man, so like having this talk alone just makes me was like, can I investigate those?
Yeah.
Just on everything.
Yeah.
Like, oh, is that a wall? Can I investigate that? Yeah, it's a wall. Can we move on, please? But I don't want to get to that point.
Yeah.
But God, that's cool. But I think that also plays a separate part. Like, some people build some players specifically.
Yeah.
Will build their backstory and then forget they built it.
Oh, sure.
And like, oh yeah, I did write that backstory. And like, I say this because I've personally forgotten pieces of my backstory.
Yeah.
That all of a sudden become super freaking relevant at a given time in a campaign, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
When the DM is able to utilize that. But it's also kind of like, okay, well, I did this because you took the time to write it.
Yeah.
And I took the time to incorporate it, and you missed it.
Yeah.
Dang, that sucks.
Yeah, it
like,
does.
I can. Oh man, that's like secretly writing a. That's like that feels like putting an Easter egg into a thing, and no one ever finds it.
To the point where I'll kind of cheat. I'll be completely honest. Like I will say, I will ask you for your passive perception score, and then I'll tell you what comes to mind.
It occurs to you that you don't know of any Minotaurs that should have ever died in this area.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I have a backstory.
I have no problem with laying it on thick because it's rewarding.
It's
rewarding to me to have you like realize that you've been kind of taken care of.
Right.
And I don't want to have those moments where you kind of skip out on it, like, unless you're not interested in your own backstory, which is possible, I guess.
Then like, I mean, I don't want to say this with too much, like malice, but I really don't enjoy playing if a person doesn't at least care about the backstory they wrote.
Yeah.
Because there's a certain aspect to my time that I invested into my backstory.
Yeah.
And if you're a Disney orphan, I'm like...
My biggest pet peeve, by the way.
Yeah. So I'm just like, okay, cool. Like, but I don't know, there's this new radio station locally, and they have this line, if such and such, that's all I need to know about you.
Yeah.
And so, like, if you use a Disney orphan storyline for your backstory, that's all I need to know about you. Like, that's cool. This is the last session I'll be playing with you, kind of thing. But I don't want to say that with too much fervor, like too much validity behind it, because there's obviously a situation for everything.
So we've talked about it enough. What is a Disney orphan backstory? Just so that we have that in context.
So my parents died, and now I have woe is me because I have no parents, and I was forced to raise myself, or I was adopted by some thieves guild, and now I'm a rogue, or now I'm some insert characteristic here, like. It's the Disney orphan because every Disney character doesn't have parents, apparently. Because well, that's I think they've fixed that in some of the more recent videos and shows, but the concept remains true pretty solidly throughout the majority of Disney movies, and so the Disney orphan is a reference to that stereotypical.
It's a super low effort way to say I'm special,
and people think they're so creative when they bring it to the to a table the first time.
Yeah,
like, oh. Cool, we've got a Disney orphan, and that's all I need to know about you. Like, thanks for putting in effort, guys.
I mean, similarly, like, I'm in love with somebody who died. It also works. It's basically the same thing.
Good point. And this is another thing that goes into the concept of making sure to vet the game and be involved in pregame. As a player, I have a really hard time building a backstory if I know next to nothing about the campaign.
Sure.
So that is 100% valid. And like I made the mistake a couple times of building really elaborate characters and backstories. Without actually talking to the DM, only to find out that's like, oh, that's not going to work because you can't have that backstory because this whole concept here doesn't exist. Yeah. Like, oh, well, I mean, that's literally the core of my backstory, so now I have to go back and change it all. And that alone.
Similarly, I actually have a situation right now where I have a new player.
Uh-oh.
I had a couple players drop out, and now I have another one coming in. And she is in the middle of my world, and my world's kind of weird compared to normal 5e. I'm not in Faerun. So like we're kind of taking turns going back and forth with her backstory at this point. Like she'll give me like a bunch of kind of general stuff, and then I'll kind of fill in the blanks with where like physically things were located, what like the political climate is in those places, and just kind of like always try to give a couple of choices. So that she doesn't feel like she's being railroaded into one thing.
Sure.
And just kind of put it out there. Choosing your backstory can be game breaking for your experience though. And like maybe you're playing somebody who's always unreliable or always upset or always immature. Like that can be kind of game breaking because you're limiting your choices and you don't give yourself like a chance for a character arc.
Yeah, of course. You were talking about your new player, and she wasn't quite sure how to fit in her backstory.
Right.
You were talking about just going back and forth with her. Hey, she would give you a concept, and you would be like, "Okay, here, this is the basically a." I think you called it yes ending at one point. Like, sure. Yes, you did that, and this is how you explain it. Sure. So with that, if you don't know a lot about your campaign that you're going into, it's very difficult sometimes to create a backstory for a character, which is understandable.
Right.
Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of Sound Gaming Podcast. Be sure to continue listening. Our next episode will cover more of the game-breaking feelings that can be had within the game of D&D. Till next time.